Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing this evening? My name is Kyle, and we are here to talk about a film that's coming out next week. Yeah, right around the corner, March 6th. And the film is known as The Thorn. And right here, I have their website on right now. And we're going to talk more about this in a little bit. But the point of this particular live stream is to go over this film, the impact that it has, that could have with society, because we have had several films recently, the Jesus Revolution that came out last week, as well as this film coming out, and some other films that are coming out of a Christian sentiment. They are films that are going to kind of drive the question, do people really need to adhere to Hollywood? Because one of the reasons why this channel came about was because of the wokeness in Hollywood, even before that was really even a term. Because, we saw with like Ghostbusters, the remake, we saw, with Men in Black, I think 3, we saw several other films, including the Star Wars sequels and some of the spinoffs, how the woke agenda was becoming more of a thing. We saw stuff with like Doctor Who and Star Trek and go on and on and on. And we just saw certain narratives enter into storylines that had nothing to do with the subject matter and was making people upset. We were wondering what was happening. And so I was creating this channel simply to engage the culture so that we could talk about movies in a way that conservatives could watch and feel like, okay, I can watch this, or I know more about it because I have someone here who's telling me, an advocate. And that's how the conservative take kind of started, was because of that. And so here we are now, where things got totally crazy. Now we have movies that are just totally out of control. And the Oscars, when they did the Oscars Not So White or the Oscars So White, when they pretty much said, we're going to do affirmative action for actors and actresses based on their skin tone, we're going to give them preferential treatment, regardless of how well they did in a role, made it unattainable for me to do movie reviews anymore on this channel like I did before. I was doing Oscar movies year in, giving you an idea of what that was like and what you should go see, what you couldn't go see, and that sort of thing. And if you go out and look at our actual channel early on, you'll see a lot of the Oscar nominated films I watched and I reviewed them, but now I can't even watch them anymore. So why am I saying all this? I'm saying this because now we're into a progression now where companies like Daily Wire and independent filmmakers are coming out with films that Christians and conservatives in general want to see. And that's kind of important because what we're seeing now is spiritual warfare. And there's no other way to say that. The last video I did was talking about spiritual warfare. I talked about Ephesians 6. And in that, I was talking about how you almost have to take sides now. Either you're a conservative, or put it this way, either you're for good or you're for evil. You really can't even call it conservative anymore. Okay, that's a whole nother connotation. And so with this film here called The Thorn, we're going to go over this film and I'm going to talk about it. I actually got a chance to see it last week. I got a chance to interview the director, Mr. John Bolin. That interview is actually up on Rumble right now. You can check it out for yourself. I'm going to go through some clips there of this particular interview with Mr. Bolin. Fantastic man, Christian, had a good time on the interview. And I'm going to go over that point. I'm going to go through an article here from the Christian Post about this particular movie. And the reason why I'm not doing this as a standard movie review, as I typically do a movie review that has an intro, the trailer a little bit. I have, I talk about the story, the plot. I talk about the emotional impact. I talk about these sorts of things. I give a conservative take section and a final score. This one isn't like that, because this particular film is a lot different. It is a film which is essentially filmed from a stage production that had been going on for about 20 to 25 years. And he'll get into that in a second. And so I thought it'd be a cool idea to do this in a live setting so people can ask questions. I'm not going to spoil anything about this movie, but I will say this, and I'll get into that in a second. If you have any intention of seeing The Thorn, whether it be on stage, which is about 4 hours long, I think 3 to 4 hours long, or the film, which is about an hour and a half, 2 hours, you need to make sure that kids are not seeing some of these parts, because it is essentially Cirque du Soleil Cirque du Soleil meets the Passion of the Christ. And the second half of this film is very, 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 very intense. And I have John tell you about that in his interview, but it's very, very intense and hard to watch. And so don't want to lead anyone down the wrong road. All right, so let's jump into the first clip here. And I think I've gotten to enough segue here. So what I'm going to do quickly here is I'm going to mention something really quickly here about something called Promise Keepers. And I'm going to set this clip up real quickly because this film came out of Colorado. Okay, the cesspit, or I would say the cesspool now, but back in the 90s and in the 2000s, it was a pretty much a blue, not a blue state, but it was a red state. And now it's just gone, the way it's gone. However, but out of the Colorado Buffaloes, the coach there started a movement called the Promise Keepers movement, and it was fantastic. And I asked this guy, Mr. John Bolin, the director of this film, about that. So before I do that and show this clip, I want to at least give you an idea of what Promise Keepers was, so that when you hear it in the clip, you'll know some context. So let's play this clip here, and then once this is done, it'll be about 30 seconds. I'll jump right into the first clip, and we'll talk about what Mr. Bolin has to say.
Promise Keepers began when Coach Bill McCartney, a successful football coach, riding in a car with Dr. Dave Wardell, was asked a question, what would you do if money or anything was not an object? He said, I'd fill stadiums full of men cheering Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord. Following that, they had their first men's event on the campus of Colorado University. They had 4,000 men who were there. Powerful time and a great expression. Coach challenged those men to bring 12 each, and they would fill the stadium full of men.
We're men of God. We love Jesus. Nothing else matters.
All right, so that's the clip. That's Promise Keepers. Now I'm gonna go into the first clip where I bring this up and mention this to him, because when he said that this is birthed out of Colorado, I had to ask the question. So here we go. This is John Bolin, the director of the film The Thorn. It's not your typical film in terms of just standard movie. It's more of a event, and I'm gonna get into that in a second. But I want to segue into what you just said about Colorado. When I first heard Colorado and I heard a Christian film and a movement, I could only think about Coach McCartney of Buffalo, the Colorado Buffaloes, and the Promise Keepers movement, which I was a part of way back when. And I want to talk to you about that. Were you involved in that at all, or is that influence, or is Colorado just that hotbed of society or our country where we just have a Christian revival coming out from that area? Is that just a coincidence, or is that something you were involved with?
So, Kyle, I moved to Colorado in 1995, and that was the height of the Promise Keepers movement. I remember going to Promise Keepers at CU in Boulder, there on the football field, and hearing Coach McCartney and seeing these tens of thousands of men worshiping God together. And then in Colorado Springs, of course, this is definitely it's like a coming together of all these Christian nonprofits, from Compassion International, the Navigators, David C. Cook, Focus on the Family. And literally, I think there are several hundred Christian nonprofits here in Colorado. And so I do think there's some really amazing things coming out of Colorado. I didn't move here for the Promise Keepers movement per se, but I was there and certainly was part of receiving the blessing of all that was happening through that movement in the mid-90s. And I became a youth pastor in Colorado Springs in 1996. So was definitely influenced by the influential men of God like Coach McCartney across the country during the mid-90s.
And so that's what he said about the Promise Keepers. I had to get that question out of the way. So let's if you're just joining us, this is a reaction to the film, The Thorn. I watched this film 2 weeks ago. I got a chance to interview the director, John Bolin. You just heard from him right there. And this film is not a movie that you would go to see that you would think would be something like, your standard film. It is a stage production done theatrically. And if you know anything about Cirque du Soleil, you'll know that it's a grand production. And the film is absolutely a production. It is fantastic in its quality, and it is just extremely, extremely powerful. And so one of the reasons why I want to do it this way was because I wanted to interact with people. If you want to ask questions, do so. I can tell you more about the film. I won't spoil anything. But I will tell you that this is not for young kids. The first half of the film is okay. Second half of the film is very intense. They even have a warning in the beginning of the film to, hey, you need to, make sure you understand this, because this is really, in some ways, it could be considered a hard R rating if you saw it in some ways. All right. So, and one thing about this particular film I want to talk about is, and the importance of this film is the fact that it has a lot to do with kids and their making their way through the world. The youth movement in Christianity, I know when I was coming up in the 80s, was coming right off the movement in the 70s, which there's actually a film out right now called Jesus Revolution, which kind of talks about that, when there's just a lot of biblical, Christ-centered, Christian-centered films that were out. And it was just part of our culture. That's gone now. And the values that were instilled in our society are no longer there. I'll give you a perfect example, and this is a good segue. You have Deion Sanders, who's the coach for the Colorado Buffaloes, and he's a Christian man, and he has a long testimony about that, and he makes no shame, or he makes no bones or no apologies about his faith, and he's under flack right now because he's praying with his team. He's even under attack from an atheist organization telling him, look, you can't pray with your team because you are a coach, not a pastor. And I do believe that the Supreme Court, either of Colorado or maybe even of the US, has basically ruled in his favor, at least temporarily, that he's under the protection of the First Amendment. So all this is what I'm saying is that kids don't really have outlets now to really express themselves spiritually or to know what's going on because no one's telling them anything. And I hate to say it, the church really, in some ways, isn't really doing a really good job of really, in my opinion, when I'm saying doing a really good job of meeting the needs of the lost. But that's a topic for another discussion. That's part of the reasons for this film. So right with this being said, I'm going to let you hear again from John Bolin. This is from my interview with him last week. And he is talking about the start of this, how it got started, and that a young child, a teenager, was an inspiration in this whole movement happening and how it's blown up so big and what God's been doing since then. So here we go again. This is John Bolin talking about the start of the movement, which is called The Thorn.
Colorado Springs, just to start a small business. Volunteered at my church, became the youth pastor there. And as the story goes, on a Wednesday night in October of 1996, I was sitting on the edge of the stage after the youth meeting, and the 16-year-old girl came and sat next to me, and she was bawling, and she held out her arms, and I could see where she'd been cutting up and down her arms. And I looked at her and I said, you don't have to do that because Jesus did that for you. And so I thought, you know what, next Wednesday night, and Kyle, I wasn't a great preacher. I'm not a theologian. I didn't go to seminary. I'm a business major. My parents were both very creative. They acted at the Goodman Theater in Chicago. My dad's a folk music singer. My mom's a fine artist. So we kind of have this creative thing in my family. So instead of preaching as a youth pastor, we would do what I called illustrated sermons. So a lot of drama and music and video and pyrotechnics, whatever it would take to grab young people's attention so we could share the love of Jesus with them. So I thought next Wednesday night, I want to do a drama, and we'll show two things. I want to show young people. I thought of this girl that had been self-harming, and I thought, I want her to know whatever pain she's going through, whether it's emotional or physical or relational, whatever's happening in her life, Jesus understands because he's been here. He walked our streets, and he gets us. He knows what it feels like to be wounded, to be hurt, to be abandoned. He endured the worst pain of all, not for like humanity in general, Kyle, but for each one of us. When he bled and died, he thought of John Bolin and Kyle, and he was thinking of us. So I wanted to show that on stage. And I also wanted to show what I think is, I call it the supernatural battle for the calling, the destiny, and the identity of this up and coming generation. And so The Thorn, the very first.
All right. So he was going into more of it. If you want to see that full interview can be seen on Rumble. I'll leave a link below, but just go over to our Rumble channel. It's up there right now in its entirety. And what I liked about this particular talk was that it wasn't something that he was seeking to do. I mean, John said, look, I was sitting next to this young lady. She was had these cut marks on her arm, and it was obviously she was in some pain. And so he said, look, you don't have to do this. And so I'm gonna read this quote here from this article. He said, and this is him saying in this article from the Christian Post, I thought next Wednesday night we're going to do an illustrated sermon. We're going to communicate two things. Number one is the price that Jesus paid for high school and college kids. I didn't want it to be gratuitous, but I wanted it to be visceral and real. And number two, I wanted them to understand that there is a spiritual battle for their choices, their identity, and their calling. And so with that being said, let's just jump into a little bit about here. I wish I had Nicole on here, but she's actually vacationing at the moment. But just the whole mental health side of this, because teenagers today and young kids and young adults, I just can't imagine the stress, the anxiety that these young people have to deal with because they aren't given an outlet outside of church. And if church isn't doing the things that they need to be doing in terms of proper discipleship, proper theology, and I'm not against big production in churches. I'm not against these big churches that have these huge presentations where they have lights and cameras. And in fact, I ran the camera at a major church like that. I'm not really against that, but at the same time, I think the purpose of church is to, number one, glorify God, and number two, disciple the church. And if we aren't doing that, then we're doing our kids a disservice, especially in a society right now when it's very difficult to express what you feel because you're going to be called an outcast because Christianity is under attack, especially here in the Western culture. And so let me keep going here. It says in this article, it says, what followed the thorn was a live theatrical portrayal of the life of and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, described as the Passion for Christ meets Cirque du Soleil. So what I'm going to do actually, guys, is when this is all done, I'm going to go through the last clip. I'm going to give you my review of this, and I'm going to just quickly give that sort of thing to you because I did see the film, and it is really, really powerful, and I can't say that enough. But that's what it is. It's a stage production, multiple cameras with these theatrics going on. People coming down from the stage, swords being thrown, angels fighting. It's really, really incredible thing to watch. The stage production combines martial arts, aerial acrobatics, people coming down from the stage, up from the ceiling onto the stage, and emotionally powerful performances to bring the story of Jesus to life. So with that being said, let's talk about the core message of what this film is about and what it is going to talk about in terms of its core messaging. I'm going to have, again, John talk about that.
This happened 25 years ago. I'll keep it short, but it wasn't very good. The music wasn't good. The makeup wasn't good. The costumes weren't very good, but it worked. And the reason it worked is because God loves it when we tell his story. And that Wednesday night, hundreds of kids decided to follow Jesus, found freedom and redemption and hope. And then we began to do it beginning the next year at Easter time for the local church. And it grew for 25 years. It became this huge Easter production with, at one point, hundreds of cast members. And we had as many as 40,000 people coming to this local church every year to see this production. People ask me, what is The Thorn? And you just kind of described it at the very beginning, like watching, it's not really a movie, it's an experience. That's true. It's and it's not really a musical either. Like the characters don't sing. Peter doesn't sing from the garden. There's no Jewish line dancing. It's more like a series of cirque style entertainment scenes that tell the story of the gospel. And then there's a narrator that weaves it all together. And in the live experience, the narrator is on the edge of the stage and talks to the audience. In the film version, we created a story where it's a separate, like we filmed it in a studio and there's a second character that the narrator speaks to. So it's more like a cirque meets the Passion of the Christ, if that makes sense. And there's a lot of things going on. We have demons and angels fighting and flaming swords and people doing flips and all the things, but that's all just window dressing for the core purpose, which is to communicate to people that Jesus loves them and that he died for them and gave his life for them.
So I cut that off early, but sorry, but I hope you can still hear it. So he basically said at the end that that it was about the Cirque du Soleil acts that happen, but in the day it's about Jesus Christ and the message that comes from that. And so what I want to talk about here is essentially, that Easter's coming up, and how this could be a really good opportunity for people to actually share messages with people who may not go to church, and who don't know much about that. And I asked him, actually, I may jump around here. I may go ahead and go directly to this particular part of it, because I asked him about wokeness. I asked him about the woke culture. I asked him about, if you don't want to get into politics, don't worry about it. But I was just curious, what's this take on the society and people who are coming to this who haven't heard much about Christ at all because of the reasons I mentioned, but now they're getting this, which is totally antithetical to their worldviews, especially if you're talking about people who are leftists, especially people who I imagine live in Colorado. I've never been to Colorado, but I imagine they're like other leftists around the country. How would they think about it? And I asked this question directly, and this is what he said. I asked this question because my audience, we deal with woke media, we deal with cancel culture, and that sort of thing. And also, the image of Christ has been dumbed down a lot in the liberal media, and we're a conservative channel. So if you don't want to talk politics, that's fine. But can you at least speak to Hollywood and their perception of Christian films? And this is Cirque du Soleil type, so that's more in their wheelhouse in terms of a liberal type thing that they want to go see. And so, are you prepared to deal with what's coming from that side of it? And can you also speak to how this is counterculture to what Hollywood's been pushing, what Christianity is about, to these kids who are hopeless today?
Yeah, so it's ironic because the Thorn live experience does best in our less conservative markets, believe it or not. So for whatever reason, because we're using the performing arts in such an extravagant, crazy way, the liberal audience actually doesn't have a problem with it. The biggest critics we have, Kyle, is not the liberal media at all. By a mile, our biggest critic is our people that are Christians. Like, if I could show you, I should send you some screenshots, but if I show you the comment section on our Facebook page, like, it's 99% really amazing. This is amazing. Can't believe it. It's awesome. And then that 1% are people that say, well, this is making the gospel a circus, or this isn't, the Bible doesn't have this, or this particular little thing doesn't look right, or they didn't wear that, or it's all the little things and not the broad strokes. And so we want the Thorn to be a picture of heaven. We want the Thorn, like, personally, we talk about, like, even woke media, like, I want the Thorn cast and crew to be the most diverse. We want it to be ethnically diverse. We want to have men and women on stage. We want it to be Jesus loving, like a picture of heaven, so that when people watch the production, they feel like it's their story. And so the story of Jesus is not for conservatives or liberals. The story of Jesus is not for men or women or people in America versus people overseas. The story of Jesus is for everyone. And so I want, regardless of what their background, and we have a lot of people that are responding to our Facebook ads, even, that are like, I had a guy yesterday that said, he's like, I'm not even close to a Christian, but I would go see this. I'm in, like, I'm down for this movie. That's, like, for me as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, as a believer, like, that's the whole mission, is bring people into this story that are outside the circle of faith. So
all right, so again, that's John Bolin talking about the film and talking about wokeism, and that it's actually being better received against people who are not saved, which is interesting. I would have thought the difference would be, I thought it would be different. I thought it would be something like they would have people trying to actually protest these particular films, but I'm pretty pleased to see that that's not the case. So he also mentioned in this article here, he says this as a quote, he says, "This is a way for people across the country that have never been to a Thorn live performance to experience it." So if you're just joining us, I'm talking essentially about a film called The Thorn. It's a 25-year in the making production that started way back in Colorado 20 plus years ago by John Bolin. He told the story about, he met this girl who was crying, who was in pain, and he was going to do something for her called an illustrated sermon. And doing so, that grew into a stage production, which grew into a very massive stage production. And now it's a theatrical movie, and it's going to be in theaters 6th and 7th of March. And well, I have you guys now. Let's talk over about the actual website here. Let me jump to that real quickly and show you. If you go to the website, you can find theaters right here by clicking on here. If you go to thethorn.com and go to find and get tickets today, hopefully that will still show up on the screen. It does. And so from there, you can actually see where you are in the country and find out from there how to see this. I guess that could be next week, right? So that would be the Monday and Tuesday of next week. And you can also, in this website, go to the actual stage production if you live near a live performance area. So, all right. So this, again, since if some of you are just joining us, feel free to comment. Someone just commented here, rebuke and reprove. Thank you so much for jumping in here and giving us your thumbs up. And I wanted to say this real quickly. This is a section in the interview that I gave with, that I was part of with John Bolin, was the question about the intensity of this film. And I want him to tell you for himself what this is about and is it really appropriate for kids? Let's hear what John Bolin has to say about that.
The film version, it's hard to watch. But even what you saw, Kyle, it took us a month to edit the footage down to what you saw. So the original footage is twice as long, especially the scourging through the crucifixion. That portion, it's twice as long in the pre-cut version called the director's cut than what's going to be in Fathom. So we have worked really hard. I don't want parents to show up at the film and be surprised. I don't want parents to show up at the film and think, what did I do? So that's why we have that warning. For the first act of The Thorn, from creation through that Last Supper, it's great. Like, you're watching it and you're thinking, okay, I see the little story here, this like Princess Bride, old man and the boy story. And then I see the heaven scene hits you and you're like, this is crazy. Like, they're doing martial arts in heaven. Like, this is what's going on, and flaming swords, and Jesus is healing people, and there's breakdowns, like all these things happen. And then Act 2, it suddenly gets real. And that's exactly the way it goes. So Act 1, good for everyone. Younger kids can watch it. And then Act 2 is where I think parents have to be cautious. I do think that 10 years ago, I would have said probably like 12 years, 13 years old is the thing. I think media has been so numbing to our kids that even younger kids now, it won't be as surprising or as shocking as it would have been 10 years ago. So that's unfortunate, but it's true. So I just tell parents, your kids, use discretion. But I can tell you, we've had a lot of parents with younger kids that the younger kids have been deeply moved and we've had hundreds of thousands of people that have made commitments to Christ, found freedom and found hope in Jesus because of all the different scenes, from the Judas scene to the crucifixion and resurrection portion. So yeah, the second half is tough to watch.
All right, so we're going to wrap this thing up. I mean, I've been going for about a half hour. I've covered just about everything I wanted to cover without actually trying to spoil the film. So what I'm going to do real quickly here is I'm going to give a quick review of the film, and then I'm going to close it up with the last segment from John, the last segment we have, and then I'll let him do that, and then we will call this live stream, give it a wrap. And again, if you guys have any questions, by all means, jump in here. And I don't really want to give the spoiler out. So if you want to cover your ears, I recommend you doing it. It's not really a big spoiler, but he didn't mention it in the interview. He kept it from the interview. So I'm going to just divulge this here quickly, just so you guys know what the story is about and what it goes through from a narrative standpoint. So I'm going to give you about 5 seconds, and I'm going to tell you the first part of it. And if you want to come in about a minute later after I start, then you can do that. So I'll give you 5 seconds and we'll start. All right. So in this film, the Thorn, it starts off as a regular movie narration. You see an old man. He's in a cave, and he's scribbling some notes. He's writing. It's obviously biblical times because of the way he's dressed and the way he's writing in Hebrew, I believe, or he's in Aramaic or Greek or whatever he's writing in. And you realize, what's going on here, but you don't really know who this person is. And so he's in this cave writing these information, and then you see a young boy comes in, and he comes in, and I believe they tell you early on who this person is, and they reveal that this is actually John, the Apostle John, who the last of the disciples, who survived and is now on the island of Patmos. And he's writing the story of his life and his relationship with Christ. And so the boy sneaks in. I guess he's fleeing persecution. And next thing you know, he tells him the story about Jesus and where it starts. And he goes back to the beginning of time from Genesis itself. And then once that starts, then it goes to a stage production. And then from there, they start the whole narration of creation, the fall of man, all the way up until Christ and so forth. So I thought that was a very, very good way of putting it, because what that sets is perfectly is a worldview perspective, because what many people are missing today are a biblical worldview perspective. If I indulge you a little bit on this review, I will say that is extremely important, because if you look at the civil rights movement, for example, how just about every fabric of our society has been inundated and or co-opted by a communist Marxist agenda. And it just is what it is. And the more I'm learning about it, the more I'm finding this out. But speaking specifically with the civil rights movement, it really did that. And what's happening with the Black community in particular is they're having a disdain for America. They're having a disdain for anything dealing with Europeans or Western society. And yet they live here. They go to Starbucks. They have their Apples, their iPhones. They have their Nikes, but yet they don't like capitalism. It makes no sense. But yet they hate America. And it makes no sense. And so it comes down from this worldview, this framework of humanism, secular humanism, where we remove God from everything. And that's why in the beginning of this live stream, I said, look, we are now at a point where it's good versus evil. It's no longer really a side now of red or blue. It's no longer a side really of even oligarchs versus the people. It's really an issue of good versus evil. And if you frame it in the way that this director does in this production for The Thorn, it brings the viewer along in a way that hopefully makes sense, because they'll say, hey, why do bad things happen to good people? They ask these questions that are philosophical that no one really has an answer for outside of the Bible, because no one trusts the Bible anymore and so forth. So that's why I think the beginning of this film is really, really good in that way, because it helps kids understand, look, there is more to life than just, well, first of all, it never existed, where you have primordial soup, billions of years, rocks coming to life and monkeys and to man, and how death led to life instead of life leading to death, which is what the worldview that I'm talking about is diametrically opposed. Those type of things need to be dealt with before you can even deal with the whole notion of salvation, because you have to first know or realize that you are a sinner and you're fallen. So, and I don't make apologies on this channel for being, evangelical or talking about the gospel, because the fact is the conservative take, again, has to deal with the truth, and the truth deals with the Bible and it deals with those principles. And where we are now, it's either one or the other. It's either good or evil, and that's where we stand. So you really have to just cut you have to really just take the core principles and bring it down to its logical denominator, which is what I just mentioned. Otherwise, you're going to get lost in the weeds, and you're going to lose every single argument. You're going to lose every single discussion point. You're going to confuse people, because it doesn't make any sense if you say, well, why is this happening? But if you tell them, look, it's happening because you're a fallen person, the creature, a fallen creature, and even though you were created from God, all of a sudden now it makes more sense, because now you realize, oh, if I'm a fallen creature or person or sinful, then I need something to substitute that so that I can have a fulfilled life and an eternal future. Okay, so the film goes through that, and it goes through halfway through, like you said before, it goes through various scenarios. Jesus has his ministry, and of course you have breakaway sessions. For instance, like Judas Iscariot, when they're in the upper room and Jesus is saying, someone's going to betray me, and they want to know who it is. And he said, look, the person who dips in, their hand with my hand in this cup, that's the one. Once that happens, there's a whole theatrical deal there with Judas going through this turmoil. And in the interview that I had on Rumble, he talks about this. John does, the director, that the Bible says that he was inundated with the devil. And so you see that battle going on within Judas. And so there's a lot of expository things that happen in the film. It's, again, very theatrical, very easy on the eyes, the first half. But then, of course, we get to the Gethsemane and on. And the scourging is very, very difficult to watch. The crucifixion scene is very difficult to watch. But, of course, it ends in a good fashion with the resurrection. And so there's not going to be many people who are going to be dry-eyed on this film. If you watch the film, The Passion of the Christ with Mel Gibson, where he directed it back 20 years ago now, you'll see in there, this is very similar in some ways, even though that was done in Aramaic, this is done in English, but you got the tone and everything is very similar. And, just the cross scene, just the blood and all that was just, overwhelming to some ways. So there's fair warning there. But overall, to score this film, I would definitely say this is a go for my conservative take. It has tons of intangibles. I haven't really scored it in that way because it doesn't really relate to a theatrical type movie. We have actors and everything. It's not really even a musical. It's just a production. So I'll leave it like that and give you my thumbs up there that you should go see it. But again, with the caveat of kids being warned about the intensity there. All right. So with that, guys, I'm going to end this particular live stream here. I got some minutes to wrap up here. If you have any questions before this last thing ends, I will try and see if I can get those filled for you. And I will try and get maybe another, if he's available, interview with John, if he's available, to maybe discuss the impact of what's happened after this film's been out a few weeks and see what happens there. And so with that, guys, I'm going to go ahead and play this last clip. This is John Bolin talking about what we can do to support and what you can do to watch this film and even the live broadcast, even the live stage production, if it comes to an area near you. The audience and everyone who's seeing this, how can we help you in terms of promoting this film? Talk about the release date and what your plans are in the future, and then how we can get a hold of you and support you, and then you can close us out with that.
Thank you, Kyle. Yes, first of all, thanks to your audience, and you're a great host. Awesome questions, very thought-provoking and thoughtful. The best way to find out information about The Thorn, it premieres in movie theaters across the country, so probably in your hometown on March 6th and 7th. If you go to thethorn, thethorn.com, then you can click on a button that says Watch the Thorn Movie or find tickets for the Thorn movie, and it'll take you to another website where you can put in your zip code and find the movie theater closest to you, and you can buy tickets that way. Invite your friends, your family, your enemies, your neighbors, bring them with you and go watch this production. And then if you're in one of the live city locations, we'll be touring from next week through Easter Sunday. You can go to the website and figure out where we're playing live, or go to the movie. And if you like the movie, then come and join us somewhere for a live show as well. That'll be, again, for the next 4 weeks. So the best way to get information is thethorn.com. We'd love to have you show up. And more than anything, more than the thorn or anything else, let's celebrate the resurrection and the hope that Jesus can bring to our generation and to each one of us. And so, Kyle, thanks for having me on. Thanks for the time. You're a great host. Performance happened 25 years ago.
All right, everybody. So that's going to be it for this particular episode of the Kyle Sugg Show, the special edition. I'm trying something new here, and we'll see how that works. If you like this format, let me know. We'll see what happens with more things that come up. And at one point in time, I'm going to do a live stream where I'm actually going to just answer comments on YouTube and maybe even Facebook, because the stuff I get on YouTube is just, it's gold. And some of it's really good. And I want to make sure that people who are actually saying things that are encouraging get some time to. I actually, for the past 3 years, have been bookmarking comments for the past 3 years that have been inspiring, interesting, things I need to look back on. So I'm going to be going through some of those comments over the next, few months. And because they're piling up big time. I have probably over 100 to go through. So, but just as thanks to those who are been supporting us for that longer periods of time. All right. So everybody, thank you so much for coming on the Kyle Sugg Show. I'm going to drop off here. And I wish you guys the best. And go check out this film called The Thorn, directed by John Bolin, in theaters March 6th and 7th. Go to thethorn.com to get your tickets. And if you're going to miss the 6th or 7th, there's going to be showings all over the country we can see it live and in person. So that, everybody, see you guys in the next video, and God bless.